Good afternoon and welcome to Sophia. And I would like to explain a little bit about the overview at SPSF, which stands for the Sophia Program for Sustainable Futures. Have you ever heard of Sustainable Futures before, by the way? We put the many meanings in sustainable futures. It's not really about only the environmental issue, but also some personal aspect or the social matters. Those are supposed to be included in sustainability in our program. But unfortunately I have only 5 or 10 minutes, so I just try to look over some characteristics as well as some advantages of this program. So, first of all, the mission of the SPSF is this provides the students or the new students with a broad understanding of the world's diversities, as well as teaching them the practical skills for sustainable futures for others with others. So we try to make the human is not only the entity which is something independent from any others. That means it's supposed to be the interdependent with the nature, or sometimes the society itself also interrelated with humanity too. So we try to take those holistic approach, since as you might see, some programs or the part of the programs emphasize a lot on the crossover, the so-called disciplines or the any studies. So this is, if you can check the pamphlet of the SPSF, you can also see the same figure here. But the you, or the new students, the student is supposed to be the center of this program. So the professors will mentor you in your expertise. So that means that the professor is not only the teaching, but also that you are talking with the professors, which is quite important for this program. And secondly, the interdisciplinary approach is taken in this course. So if you measure the aim, for example, the sociology, you need to learn about some theories in economics or the education or global studies. And working with your friend is also quite important. And since the only one entity, the one individual cannot solve almost no problems, so that we need to have a lot of collaboration or the cooperation together with for the sustainable futures. And I will skip the details, but as you can see, at least you can enter a certain department, and you need to learn, especially in the second year and the third year, with the other classes or the other department students. And then finally students make the final study, which is the graduation thesis, basically. Besides them, we also have the SPSF Common Core course classes, general studies, and the other extracurricular studies or the activities. I try to introduce the first year lecture, which is required, so everybody has to take this course, and 7 professors from 6 departments will guide you for the sustainable futures. And during the second and third, they need to learn, of course including the 4th year or the final year, they need to develop their own expertise, so that they will need to learn many things in specialties. And if over 50 professors are ready for those studies, so you need to learn from those professors. And but before graduation thesis, we will have the requirement class, which is titled the 3rd year seminar, which is quite a collaborative learning. So everybody has to learn together with the certain project about sustainability. And unfortunately, we don't have a lot of time to share many things, but this is, it's quite difficult to see though, but you can see that how the graduation thesis or the studies and the research are all about. So they made a presentation in front of the audience, like this one. So all the SPSF students are expected to make a presentation of their own study at the end. Beside those academic activities, we also have a lot of extra activities too, but you will see how they look like, and some activities are quite attractive, especially outside of campus or out of Japan. So those are, I think it's more commitment, especially for the sustainable futures or the environmental issues too. This is sorry for the old, this is the last year's things, because at the beginning of this session, today's event, Professor Morishita explained the more numbers or the figures more than this one. But the point is that we have many chances or the channels to communicate or study abroad, especially. And I also emphasize the joint program, which can bring you the master degree for the totally 5 years. So 3 years for the bachelor degree, and you need to go to the outside for the 2 year for the master. So after 5 years, you will receive the bachelor degree as well as the master degrees. These are also the backgrounds, student backgrounds, and as you can see, from 2020 to 23, we are increasing a little bit, but approximately the 50 students are the joint group on the same cohort. So that hope you remember that over 50 professors are available in this course, so that almost a one-on-one teacher-student ratio can be understood for the quality of education too. And we can also emphasize that over 65% or the 2/3 of the students come from the outside. So this program is a rather international program, I should say. So my time is ticking, but today's sample class from sociology, and Professor Carola Hommerich will make a sample class. So please enjoy.
Okay, hi everyone. My name is Carola Hommerich. I'm a professor of sociology, and I teach mainly in the SPSF program. And my job is now to give you the experience of what kind of classes you would be taking, and I will be talking about the question, what is a good society? And this is kind of part of what I teach in a class called the sociology of happiness. Okay, so before I go into what actually is a good society, or how can we evaluate this, what is sociology? I guess it's a topic that you do not necessarily study at high school, so just a little bit before that, maybe a rather dry definition first. Sociology is the study of societies, of human relationships, and the institutions and structures that shape human life. So what is that? Essentially, this is what we do. So we look at how people behave and why they behave, and what is happening in societies at the micro level between individuals, but also macro level between societies. So this is kind of what we do there. But a little bit more, so we don't just look at the single individual, but we look at the wider context that individuals live in, and this can be the historical context, or the cultural context, or also institutional settings within which we can behave. And all of these shape the circumstances under which we can act, but of course we also shape them at the same time. So in order for us sociologists to understand these things, we use our sociological imagination. And this is C. Wright Mills who came up with this term. And what that means is it's the ability to look at our daily routines from the outside, like through that microscope, right? So to think about actions and behaviors which seem normal, and then we question them and we try to understand, are they normal, or are they just something that we built and we now think that they are normal, and maybe it can be really different as well. So some questions that we might ask ourselves as sociologists: why are some people rich and other people poor? I think this is maybe the most common and obvious question that you could ask. Or why do people get married before they have a child together? Is that a natural thing to do, or is this maybe not the case? It really depends which society you live in, I guess. Why do women earn less than men? It's pretty much a universal phenomenon, right? Why do some people commit crimes? Or even, why does fashion change every season? All of these are questions that, as a sociologist, you can answer. So hopefully I spark an interest there. So thinking about social context, let's take an example. I show you two pictures of two different families. Maybe, I'm not sure, maybe you know one of the two families? I get it, yes? So it seems to be the case. So now let's focus on two boys in these contexts. Now my question, which of these two boys is more likely to go to university? This is not the level of question I would ask in a class. Maybe so that you can feel engaged. Who thinks it's boy A? Who thinks it's boy B? I need your hands up there. Yes, so very clear. I mean, this is super easy to understand, but just as an example of how impactful social context is, right? So it's pretty clear, boy B, whatever he'll do, he'll be going to university, no matter if he's smart or not, doesn't matter. And whether he's smart or not, very unlikely, right? So the context really shapes this. But now let me move to a question that is less easy to answer than the one I just posed before, and it's really a lot more complex is what I'm trying to say. So what is a good society? And one answer that has been given to this, sorry, it's better if I also see that, didn't you? So has been given by Jeremy Bentham, or at least it's attributed to him, is that a society that provides the greatest happiness for the greatest number of people is what that means, right? So that would be a good society. Okay, fair enough, that sounds like a good idea, but how do we evaluate this? What is that based on, right? How do we know that? That's a really difficult question to answer. And for a long time, the idea was that, well, it's all about economic affluence. Economic growth, that will bring social progress, and that will bring better lives for all. So for a long time, the way that we have evaluated whether a society is a good, a successful society is by looking at GDP. And yeah, I mean, it's still very much around. If you listen, read, or whatever, how you consume news, you will see a lot of the time we hear GDP is going up, it's going down, it's stagnating, and there's a lot of focus on GDP. And I think people always think, okay, GDP, that's what we need to go for, but what does it actually measure, right? So GDP measures the volume of goods and services produced in a country. It just tells us how much money is going around. It doesn't really tell us anything about who gets that money, who has anything from it, right? So it doesn't really tell us anything about the life of the people in these countries, right? They might have very different GDPs. Okay, that's all we know. We don't really know if there's very unequal distribution of incomes or something like that, right? So GDP doesn't really tell us so much doesn't tell us nothing, but it's maybe not the best measure. Why? Let's take a look at this a bit further. So here is somebody who has challenged this idea of, is GDP a good measure? Richard Easterlin, born 1926, he is still alive, and he still publishes things, amazingly. And he has very early on come up with this, or discovered this, what is now called the Easterlin paradox, in an article called "Does Economic Growth Improve the Human Lot?" And this is his argument in short. And after that, he's kept researching on this more and more with additional data. So one is, within a society, rich people tend to be happier than poor people. I think everybody can easily see how that might be true, right? But rich societies tend not to be happier than poor societies, at least not much. So it really depends on the society. There are rich societies that are more happy, or people are happier than in poorer societies, but there's also less affluent societies where people are actually happier in some of the affluent societies. Why? And lastly, and this is also very important when we think about economic growth, over time, as countries get richer, they do not get happier, at least once a certain threshold of affluence has been crossed. So life satisfaction does rise with income, but only up to a certain point, and beyond this, the marginal effect of happiness decreases, which means for any more additional income that you have, your happiness doesn't increase further. Let's look at that in data. So here is the data for the US, for example, where you can see over time, so this is the timeline down here, you can see how real incomes per head, this is an average of course, has gone up over time, but at the same time, the percentage of people who say that they were very happy has pretty much stayed the same. You do not see a relationship. The same is true for Japan, for example, here. Again, we have a timeline at the bottom. Real GDP, we have it here, per capita goes up. Life satisfaction, nothing is happening, right? So after a certain level of affluence is achieved, that's very important to remember. I'm not saying, hey, let's forget about economic growth, nobody needs money. That's not my message. But for countries that have achieved a certain level of affluence, beyond that, it's not going to add more to people's happiness, right? So beyond that, it doesn't translate into more happiness. The same relationship is true also for China recently. So even there we see that people are not really getting happier despite huge economic growth, right? So this is really a universal relationship that goes for countries that have achieved a certain level of development. Oops, wrong button. So why is that the case? And there's several, I mean, this is also a complex relationship, but I'll give you some points of why this happens. Not absolute, but relative income counts. So let's do another, not thought experiment, but imagine you're asked to do some kind of task, and you get 5,000 yen, and your friend who does the same task, they get 3,000 yen. Or, different situation, and you don't know the other situation, you get 7,000 yen for the task, and your friend gets 10,000 yen. Okay, in which situation do you feel better? Who would feel better in situation A? Yeah, it's so very shy in putting up hands, but yes, who would feel better in situation B? Okay, we have a lot of rational thinkers here, but it's only, the reason is that you have seen this, okay? So you know that here you would have more than here. But if you imagine you don't know the other situation, probably you would somehow feel better unless you're like a super nice person and you would feel bad because you got more or something, right? You would probably feel a little bit like, oh, I kind of lucked out because I got a little bit more than my friends. So we do compare ourselves with others. So we evaluate what we have in comparison to others, and if everybody else also has more, that's an additional point, it doesn't really seem so special anymore. If living standard goes up for everybody, what we have is not more than what our neighbor has, so it becomes kind of normal quickly, right? So first of all, rising incomes for everyone, average happiness stays the same. So the second mechanism I explained has been discussed under the label of aspiration level theory. So if we define happiness as the gap between aspirations and achievements, so what we have versus what we want, then the problem is that we quickly adapt. So let's say you have working and you get a raise, so you have more income. An increase in money makes us happier for a while, but the effect fades quickly because we quickly adapt to that new level of income that we have because our aspirations then rise. So the more we have, the more we want. So this has been tested in lots of experiments, etc. So this holds true, unfortunately. Here's an example of where we can see how this happens, or that it does happen rather. So here again, this is data for the US, change over time in real and what people think is required income. So what we see here, the bold line is how actual incomes developed in the US over this time. And this is what people thought that they would need in order to live a decent life within their community. And you can see how it very clearly follows the actual income rise. So people do not, what they think they need doesn't stay the same at all, but it adjusts quickly to what they have. So this is really aspiration theory, level theory in effect. Okay, so these were just some factors that contribute to the fact that we do not really see an increase in happiness after a certain level of affluence is met. So economic growth for that is maybe not really so important anymore, but we also see some other negative side effects of a focus like a sole focus, I should say, on economic growth as we have seen it over the past decades. So globally, stark inequality between the global north and the global south. I'm not going to go too deeply into this. I think it's pretty clear what I mean, right? Also environmental pollution, global warming. We are now facing a climate crisis, which clearly is also an outcome of this very strong focus on economic growth, whatever it costs, right? So this and another global outcome also, global financial crisis of the late 2000s is also an outcome of trying to push for more and more profit. So here in Japan, it's more commonly known as the Lehman shock. But also within affluent countries, we also see side effects, negative side effects of a constant focus on economic growth without looking what else we should be thinking about. So growing economic inequality caused by neoliberal policies. For Japan, we have a very segmented labor market now with regular and non-regular employees, and they have very different employment conditions. That also is born out of the need to have cheaper employment in order to have more economic growth, which doesn't translate into more happiness. Weakening of social connections, increase of loneliness, social isolation, also a mental health epidemic, increase in anxiety and depressive disorders, which is kind of the opposite of the idea of economic growth will make everybody happy. So it's not really turning out to be what we wanted it to be. So maybe the relationship is not as simple. And now this has created a shift in thinking about what else should we focus on. If it's not just economic growth or it's not just GDP, how else do we know what a good society is, right? To come back to that question. And we now have a lot more data has been started to collect throughout this for about 10 years or now. It's been a trend that, for example, here we have the result of the UN World Happiness Report that has been published every year since 2012. And we can now see, so this just asks people how happy they are. How happy are you? And there's a specific question that they ask for this. And now we can compare. And well, we do see some relationship, of course, with countries being more economically affluent, that people tend to be happier. But not just that. We also see other things, like, first of all, happiest country for years is Finland. Often Denmark was also on top, so Scandinavian countries are usually doing very well. The least happy has been Afghanistan, also pretty much throughout. Japan, where's Japan? It ranks 51st out of, here we have the whole world, so 143 countries, but it's actually outranked by many less affluent countries. And there's a lot of other rankings where Japan also is not really doing as well as it would be expected to do based on the prosperity level of the society. So the next step would then be to identify factors which create these differences between countries, right? So you could compare countries with similarly levels of affluence and think about, why this difference? So why are Finland and Japan so different? That's often like a comparison that is being drawn, right? So social context, like I said, sociology is very important. It's of course my main message here now, but so we want to know why, right? And for this now, before I tell you some of the main factors, I ask you to participate in this. I hope it works. I'm not the most tech-affine person, but let's try. So can you scan the QR code and tell me what you think is necessary to lead a happy life? And you can maybe just put in any keyword that you think. So what is necessary either individually or for a country, what a country should be providing. And I'll just give you a second so everybody can scan it, and then I'll shift over and we'll check the results. Okay, I still see some phones up, so wait a second more. Okay, I'll shift, but the QR code is actually also on the outcome that I will now be showing. Just a second. I need to shift this. Yeah, at the start, money is always the biggest. I've done this before in class. It always starts out money. Let's see how it develops. Sometimes I think it might be better not showing results at all, so that it's really unbiased by what other people are doing. But okay, but we can see a lot of here. So we have good friends and family, friends, relationships, a lot about our connection with other people, right? That is very good because it's one of the main results of happiness research. Money stays big, which I think is fair enough because it is important. And my message, like I said before, is not that money doesn't matter. That would be completely naive to say that. So I do not really mean that. But other things are important, right? So what else do we have? Good health, healthcare, community, to find your people. Yeah, you see, I think a lot of it here is really about family. With a young audience, often, I mean, now we have a mixed audience, I guess, because we also have a lot of parents in the room, but often friends comes first and family then it's kind of later. Family, it's also there. Kind of not the first thing you think about, which is, I think, a question of where you are in the life course. Okay, but I think we get the picture. I only have a certain amount of time, but we do see that money is important, yes, but how we are connected to other people and how we can maybe feel in these relationships is also important. Also, delicious food, Always comes up when I do this in Japan, not so much when I did this in Germany. I wonder why, but let's not go into that. So, okay, now let me move back to my presentation. Okay, thank you very much for all your input here. Is this working? So what does impact? So we now have, because of this realization that maybe economic growth and prosperity, it's not the only thing that we should be focusing on, and we're actually missing a lot of stuff that's happening in societies for us to know whether they are good societies or not. This has created a huge field of really booming research now, happiness studies it's often called, and we now have also a lot of data and a lot of studies that have that enable us to say what are major things that really impact, that are impactful, right? So some things are good physical and mental health, super important. Rich human relationships, we really saw this now already by what you input into the World Cloud too. So in the family, at work, in the community, stable employment, stable income and employment. Like I said, of course, money matters. It's very important. Unemployment, for example, is one of the biggest negative impactors on happiness, so it is important. Good work-life balance, social cohesion, which could be how much can you trust in other people, how much do you feel that you live in a society where people kind of stand together, pro-sociality, doing something for others, right? Availability of social support, personal freedom, lack of corruption, an effective government where you feel that they are really working for their people, kind of a functioning welfare state. So all of these things have been shown to really contribute to how happy people can feel in the country that they live in. Oh yeah, and connection with nature actually also has a big effect. For example, even if you can see green from this classroom or from wherever you're studying, it affects how effectively you can learn content. So maybe studying for entrance exams, I recommend a lot of nature around you. Even a plant maybe might be helpful. Or even a picture of nature in hospital bedrooms has shown people heal more if there are landscapes on the wall and not abstract art. Okay, that's a glimpse in the happiness research, but let's now continue. So many of these factors are about the relationships with others. This is really the core of it. And so we have several initiatives collecting this kind of data. One is by the OECD, the Better Life Initiative. The idea is we need more than just knowing something about material conditions, which is part of it, like income and wealth and jobs and earnings and housing, but we also need to know about how people, the quality of life, so health status, work and life balance, education, so all these kinds of things that I listed up now. So the OECD is making an effort to collect data on these kinds of things for the now OECD countries mainly, to be able to compare what's going well in which countries and how do countries compare, and then countries can learn from each other. And the idea is better policies for better lives. So good decisions need to be based on good data. So GDP is not the thing that we should be looking at only, but we do need to consider other indicators. And that's easy to say. If you don't have them, you can't do that. So you first have to collect that data, and they're continuously also making this better and better. And here is a comparison. This is the website of the Better Life Index. Depending on where you're from or where you have lived, maybe interesting to check out. Also, the World Happiness Report I showed before has more countries, so this is only the OECD. Here they compare these different dimensions, and then you can say, like, what do you think is most important for you, and make it like more, weigh it in a different way. And then you can rank the countries. So where's Japan? That's of course the big question. Here, not doing too great in this comparison either. So Japan is now around number 30 of the 41 countries that are compared here. So it's OECD plus a few extra countries. So, but it's quite interesting what you can do. And maybe just here I'm showing you some of the data for Japan. There's a lot more in this, but not that much time now. So How's Life in Japan is the title of the OECD report on this. For example, relative income poverty in Japan is it's above OECD average. Quick question, who knew? That's a bad way to ask. Who knew this before I told you? Now, of course, everybody can say, yes, I did. Who's surprised by this result? Okay, not so, well, a little bit. Okay, good. But, or good or bad, I'm not sure. But I think by now, maybe the realization that Japan is less equal than it has often been depicted has also probably, everybody has realized, or a lot of people have realized this by now. Of 17% of poor households spend more than 40% of their income on housing costs. So housing is super expensive in Japan, especially in urban areas. It's nearly 50%, right? That's a very high share. And of course, that makes people struggle in their daily life. 11% say they have no friends or family to turn to in times of need. So this is an indicator of social isolation. And usually it's probably more than what we see here. 14% say that they would be at risk of falling into poverty if they had to forego 3 months or more of their income. So if you have a very unstable job and you lose it, then this can quickly mean that you will be really struggling financially. And if you think about this in the context of the COVID-19 pandemic, then this is really a big result or important and dangerous result. And actually, this is what happened, right? The COVID-19 pandemic in Japan especially had a very large economic effect, especially on people working in the service industry. And we did a panel study about this in one of the research projects that I'm in, where we surveyed people continuously throughout the pandemic, and especially people who were already economically vulnerable, really lost income and were really struggling with this. And here in this case, they say they had no data for these things, but there is actually data. But that I will keep for when you join my class on the sociology of happiness in the future. Okay, last, nearly done, but some other things that we need to consider when we talk about good societies and well-being. Climate crisis is, of course, something that should never be left out of any conversation on what a good society is, I think. So climate change strongly impacts our well-being already, and this impact is only going to get bigger, and it's not going to get better. So the well-being of future generations really depends on how we approach this climate crisis and how we move about it, and we need to be fast with it. And again, so this focus on economic growth, GDP in affluent nations, I mean, now we talk about green growth, and that's a whole big new discussion we can start there. But this focus on economic growth, it doesn't really add to our happiness, but instead what it does, it contributes to destroying the planet. So it has the opposite effect of what it should have, right? So what it means is that we need to redefine the societal progress, what that means for us, right? In order to achieve a happy and also a sustainable future for most people. Okay, take-home message. What am I trying to tell you here? What we measure matters. So create societies in which people can live a happy life. We first of all need to know how they feel about their lives. So now we have this World Happiness Report, for example, and what makes them happy. This is now being delivered by these happiness signs. And based on this data, we can then create evidence-based policies in order to improve people's lives. And most important point, of course, if you want to learn about how to develop and implement and also analyze these kind of metrics, right, this kind of data, then join us at SPSF Sociology. So thank you very much for your attention.